Back here on the Meat Speak podcast, powered by the certified Angus beef brand, Brian Shaw in studio. Joining me, as always, from the inner sanctum of the world headquarters of premium beef, certified Angus beef, Chef Tony Biggs, meat scientist Diana Clark. How you doing, guys?
Excellent.
Outstanding.
Fantastic.
How are you doing?
I am good. I wish for a change that I was not that good, because then I could say I'm a little salty today. Yes. So all ridiculous puns aside, the topic of today, honestly, who doesn't? Salt, right? It's one of those things. It is a veritable rabbit hole to venture down. Obviously, with both of what you guys do, meat science, culinary, you both have a lot of experience utilizing salt in different applications: preservation, flavoring, revealing flavor. Guys, let's talk about salt today. Salt is one of those things. I did a little bit of my homework. I don't just drink the coffee. It's been around since 6000 BC, right? People in what is modern day Romania used to boil water from a hot spring to extract salts, right? But there's this idea, and I heard this a long time ago, and it was the idea, somebody once told me that salt doesn't necessarily add flavor as much as it reveals flavor.
I could see that.
I love that. Yeah,
I could see that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It reveals flavor.
Well, I mean, so talk to me in your daily routines. How do you utilize salt? Because it's not just for cooking.
Well, from a meat standpoint, salt's really been used primarily for preservation in past. So it's not, I really wouldn't say that its main function nowadays is for preservation, but it used to be just used at a high level to dehydrate it, essentially remove as much moisture as possible to inhibit any microbial growth from happening. You think of jerky and stuff. They actually have recipes back from Caesar Augustus of people putting salt on things and making different brines and stuff to use, which is kind of cool. And I want to look that up. They have one where they've actually cured it with honey, and I'm very curious on how they did that.
Yeah.
But just thinking about salt today, salt is used essentially to enhance a lot of flavor. And specifically, when you're looking at your value-added products, salt's used more for that binding effect in meat. So if you think about your proteins, they're really globular in shape. So imagine that you have a 3-year-old that just drew scribbles all on a page. That's kind of like your proteins all put together. And you add salt, and it starts to unfold those proteins, and they open up, and the chlorine ions can actually go on and bind to those proteins, and it causes the water to be able to bind to the fat that you add in and be able to bind to the protein, and creates that meat emulsion or the stickiness of the batter. And so that holds everything together and gives you that nice shape and formation. So it's really fantastic, especially when you're thinking about those value-added products, your sausages, your salumis, or anything like that. And then when you look at it just simply from adding salt to different items like you would for steaks and stuff, like you said, it enhances the flavors. So if you actually look at how your taste receptors work, sodium binds to those receptors to kind of open them up and take in more flavors. So it really does simply enhance your overall palate by adding salt to things.
Excellent. Well said. Salt is it's one of those things. Salt is not necessarily salt, right? There's road salt. There's lots of processed salts, things that maybe you shouldn't necessarily consume. Although I will admit to when I'm salting my driveway, I'm like, I wonder what that's like. It is salty, right? But there are lots of different buckets that you can drop salt into, and I want to talk about the different types. And let's go ahead and start with the one that is of course everywhere: kosher salt, right? Tony Biggs, tell me about kosher salt.
Well, yeah. Listen, salt has Diana kind of explained it beautifully there. A lot of chefs are primarily go-to is the kosher salt because it doesn't have any iodine, and also the anti-clumping agent that's usually added to salt, like iodized salt. So kosher salt we use for all our meats at Certified Angus Beef. It sticks to the meat very, very well, and it's very easy to crumble and very easy to use, and the taste is just amazing.
Excellent. Do you have a of course, if you look at all the flavored salts that are out there right now, and it's amazing if you get on Amazon and do a search. Those are all kosher salts, right? They're just enhanced with something, right?
Enhanced with something, right. One of the great salts that are out there is the Malden salt. It's a very snowflake type of thin salt. A lot of the chefs use in cooking. And finishing, you've heard that term finishing, where you're just going to just put a little bit. You're going to grab your cobra arm, and you know who I'm talking about here now, right? Salt Bay. He has made salt, right? I mean, if you think about it, he has made salt famous in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And he takes his sunglasses, puts them on in front of the guest, takes the the cobra arm, and just sprinkles a little bit on your meat, and everybody's going berserk.
Oh,
Salt is everywhere. I mean, just amazing. The salt I really loved before growing up was used by a Japanese wrestler called Mr. Fuji. Okay, and he would enter the ring, throw the salt. I'm not sure if it was kosher or sea salt, and he would throw that into the opponent's face to distract him, and then he would win the match. So if you go back to YouTube and you can see these great happenings of Mr. Fuji.
That seems a little unfair to me. I'm just saying, that's a little salty, right?
It does make it a little salty.
Yeah, but he was great, And salt has been around for ages. According to Leonardo da Vinci's painting of the Last Supper, as you can see here, there is next to Judas, there is
Isn't that awesome?
a salt shaker that has been turned over. Now,
don't spill the salt shaker.
Or don't spill the salt shaker. It's bad luck.
Yeah.
Right? And
I think we all know what happened.
So you really look at that. That is, you can see that in black and white here, the salt shaker. And I was amazed because I never knew that before.
Either did I until you showed me that photo. But it's there.
It's there, right? I mean, right. Brian brought up rock salt. I mean, salt has been used for everything from your driveway to ice cream.
I was just going to say that.
We all scream for ice cream, right?
We've had to use driveway salt for our ice cream maker a few times.
You've had to use it, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And then, of course, salt crusted fish. Okay, a lot of, to make a very salt crust. You bake the fish, you take it out 135 degrees, you crack that open, and you've got this beautiful aroma, this saltiness of the fish. It's just gorgeous. But one of my favorites is a salted rim cocktail glass.
Ooh.
Okay, so that's kind of cool too. All right?
Yeah, I mean, is there any other way to do a margarita? I mean,
there's not.
Especially, I'm not a big fan of these flavored salts, but there's a lime salt. I mean, it's I mean, okay, I can get on board with that.
Yeah, that one's pretty good. It's on chips too.
The pink Himalayan salt is quite nice. That's usually from Pakistan or the Himalayan region. Diana can tell you that a lot of folks that we deal with, they build they'll build a cooler that's kind of their walls are built with Himalayan salt. Why?
Well, the Himalayan salt, like the main reason why they have salt in their cooler, so if you're thinking about a dry aged cooler, is really just to remove moisture. The pink Himalayan salt I think makes it look fancier, to be honest. You could use any type of salt block that you'd want to use, and it's still going to pull out moisture. But it does look pretty neat to have those.
It's kind of cool.
No, they're
pink Himalayan salts.
Right?
Yeah.
They're beautiful. But to be clear, from a strictly scientific standpoint, there's no leaching of salt that happens.
No,
right? You're not putting salt
pulling in
into
water.
The meat.
Yeah, you're not going to get any extra flavors because you had that salt in there. It's just pulling the moisture in.
Yeah. It's funny you think about the application of salt, right? I grew up on a dairy farm, and when we would square bale hay, and I mean like the smaller square bales where you had to literally handle every single one of them twice. You weren't trucking them around on the back of tractors, right? Technology is a beautiful thing for anybody on a farm today, but when you would put hay or straw in the barn and it was a little wet, right? My dad always had a cache of Morton salt, and he would salt each layer because you needed to draw out that moisture. Otherwise, that moisture would get so hot you'd burn the barn down.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
so
very dangerous, actually.
It's amazing. But the other use you brought up, pink Himalayan salt, is have you seen the blocks of it that you cook on?
Yes.
Like you put, I mean,
Yes.
that to me makes great sense, right?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
I agree with that.
Yeah,
like
we've
that
done
would
that,
definitely get
yeah.
flavor in there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's been beautiful.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The,
But
the one salt I wouldn't recommend is, when I lived in Jordan, I was able to go to Lot's Cave. And if you know anything about biblical studies, what happened at Lot's Cave, I won't go into it all, but, the wife of Lot was turned into a pillar of salt.
Yes.
yeah.
So don't want the one
Yeah,
that
yeah.
kind
I
of
wouldn't.
salt.
I wouldn't want that salt.
I don't want that kind of
No,
salt.
no. There's bad blood there.
Right, literally. Right. Talk to me about, and this is a question I just generally have. Kosher salt you see everywhere. I have it. But you also see things labeled sea salt. What is the difference between kosher salt and sea salt? We'll get into the iodized stuff later on, but what are the differences? Obviously, the shape is a little different, but why would you choose one over the other? Why aren't they universal?
Well, the kosher salt, again, is a little bit more refined, easier to use, and it doesn't have the iodine. Either does the sea salt. So if you look at the Malden salt, which is the snowflake, very flat type of salt, that has amazing flavor. And a lot of my friends, a lot of high-end chefs that I know use the Malden salt because it just has a different texture, and it's really good for finishing as well. So there's two kind of applications for both of those. One kind of finishing, and then one for daily use.
Something that's kind of cool too with sea salt. So if you ever heard of nitrites, we use them a lot in curing meat to help preserve pink color and prevent that warmed over flavor, and it helps with microbial growth as well. Well, before, a lot of times the sea salt is all they used to use to salt meat. They didn't have this purified salt or anything like that. So the nitrates kind of were added in there accidentally. And then finally, when we got to the process of cleaning some of these salts out and just purifying them a bit more, we realized that we're taking components out of that salt that were naturally found in it, the nitrites being one of them, that helped with some of those colors. Because if you just add salt now to some meats or your sausages to preserve them, a lot of times you cook your sausage ahead of time and then you'll reheat them, so you're going to get that warmed over flavor, and they look really brown or grayish in color. But when you add that nitrite into it, it's going to have still that bright pink color. It's going to look fresh, retain more moisture, and again, help prevent a lot of microbial growth too. So there's a lot of kind of neat functions with that. Sea salt just kind of was brought on, and now it's kind of going back to being used again. So yeah, it's cool to think
You've
about.
seen the sea salt caramel cookies and
Yeah.
caramels and brownies.
I didn't even think about that aspect.
You think sea salt has really been put on the forefront?
It really has.
Yeah.
It's just amazing.
Now, the downside of using sea salt. Fish poop. Just saying.
They can't get
I
that
prefer
stuff
my
out of
salt
there.
mined from somewhere. You touched on it already, Diana, but talk to us about curing salts and pickling salts. What makes them different, or what are those reasons that you'd want to use those in place of traditional sea salts?
So a lot of times you want to use them because they are more purified and they dissolve a bit more easily, and you get rid of some of those ions in there that can create oxidized meat. So it helps remove some of those things, and then you're working with a more controlled substance. Because if you have some other things in there, for example, there was a time where I worked at another company, and we're using actually potassium chloride. And when we would add phosphate into it, because phosphate helps increase the binding, it helps add more moisture, they would actually chelate out. So you'd have some potassium and that phosphate coming together, and then they wouldn't functionally work in the meat batter anymore. So if you have some salt that has some extra things in it and it's not that purified, it's going to cause those to be able to react and bind to other stuff. You have to remember this is the science part of meat science. There's still a lot of chemistry in there that's involved with things binding to each other and reacting to each other. So that's why you kind of want to have more of that clean salt to go into your formulation. So they dissolve more easily, and then they're more functional actually in the meat batter itself.
Outstanding.
Mm-hmm.
It's important to know. I mean, salt is one of those things. It's what it's the difference between salt and sugar. I always like to think is you don't really need sugar, right? But you need salt to live. It's like water, right? It works. It becomes electrolytes, which bind stuff in your blood, right? That's as technical as I get, right? But it's necessary to have some level of salt going on. Because of salt consumption, and it's something that everybody has to have, that's where iodized salt really kind of came into the picture, right? They were the powers that be decided to utilize salt as a way to give us something that our bodies were lacking, correct?
Yeah, they needed it too. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Tell us a little bit about that process. Iodized salt obviously has iodine, which a lot of people were deficient, and so
back in the 60s.
Yeah,
I can remember my grandmother. Oh, we need iodized salt. That was the big thing. It was, it wasn't. I'm showing my age now. I hate to say that, but it's not like we have all these. Right now, we have all these different, different salts. So I can remember my grandmother. Oh yeah, you have to have iodized salt. You have to have iodized salt. So I think the powers to be, like Brian said, I think there was a consensus that Americans needed more iodine, in their diet. I have high blood pressure, and I think folks that are worried about their blood pressure should watch their salt content. So the Himalayan or the rock salt is, the sea salt is probably the best. And table salt really is kind of the one that you should watch out as far as blood pressure goes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even from beyond a health aspect, iodized salt in cooking, not necessarily something that you're looking for as a chef, right?
Well, people still use it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a matter of education. That's why we're on here, educating folks, and hopefully we have a lot of listeners to, hey, kosher or sea salt, right? And so every time we go out on the road, Diana and I go on the road, we preach the kosher salt, and because, quite frankly, that, it sticks to our proteins better, and it just has an amazing flavor.
It really is a difference. Like before I started working here, we'd never bought kosher salt. I didn't even think about it because why do we need to buy all these different kinds of salts? But then you try it. I mean, it creates a better crust on there. And even just visually, you can see it when you're putting it on the meat so much better. So you know exactly how much you're putting on. I feel like when you just use that table salt, you add it on, you have no idea what you just put on there.
You're right.
And so you could either have little salt or too much salt, and it just makes it really variable, which I think this just makes it way more consistent.
Absolutely. But you have to be careful with the kosher salt too, because if you use too much, it's got such an unbelievable flavor. And I've had to even train my wife how to use it because it's not like the table salt we normally buy in a grocery store.
It's true.
Yeah. Well said. And I'll tell you what, on that note, says we're talking about different quantities of salt that you are supposed to use. And there's recommended daily amounts and whatnot. And you can, of course, look that up on the Google anytime you want. But one of the things, and this is near and dear to my heart, and it was the first thing I thought of when we said, hey, let's do an episode about salt. I want to talk about my dear friend monosodium glutamate, which, of course, it's been maligned, right? It used to be really popular in lots of foods, and then people started getting sick, getting headaches, and it kind of became a journey to get it taken off of menus. And I think as time has progressed, as science has kind of come back through, it's kind of been discovered MSG isn't the devil that it had been played out to be, Diana, right?
Yeah, it's really, I mean, it's naturally found too. It's really not bad, and not everyone has effects from it. Certain people do, certain people don't. So I think I don't mind that it's labeled so people know, like, okay, I'm not going to eat that if I don't want to. But in all honesty, I was saying before, we've actually used these for anchors in our sensory study. So a lot of times we do sensory tests where we taste a piece of meat and we'd have to say, okay, on its umami flavor, on a scale of 0 to 10, what is it? And so when I say anchor, we'd have one thing that would be, okay, here's a 0. So absolutely no umami flavor whatsoever. And a 10, we would actually sample MSG, and that would be boom. Now that's what you're expecting. I mean, you think of mushrooms. I cook mushrooms simply to add that extra flavor, and that's MSG in there. I mean, that's where it's coming from. So it's kind of, I I love it. I do think it's not bad if it's regulated and not a specific regulation, but just know how much you're putting in because it does have an effect on people. I mean, you think about nitrites; those are definitely regulated on how much can be added in. So just having those different levels. But like you were saying, you could add that, and now you get all this beefy umami flavor from that. So you don't need as much salt. So some people that maybe are trying to watch their sodium intake, it's not a bad idea to have something like that in there.
Yeah, you're not just drawing out saltiness or adding salty flavor. You're enhancing a little bit of that salty flavor, but it is that all-encompassing. The best example I've heard, and it's actually probably the one that really like sort of sparked my okay, we got to make MSG right with the world again. Somebody once said, go to your local grocery store, buy a bag of Doritos, buy a bag of the off-brand Doritos, right? Eat them side by side and tell me which one's better. And you'll always choose the Doritos first because the Doritos are made with a little bit of MSG in there. It makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense.
Pulls you in every time.
I'm such a fan, yeah. And there are actually a lot of studies that say if you can handle it, and Chef Tony, you've said you actually tend to get headaches from it. And as somebody who spent a lot of time in Asian cultures, you certainly had plenty of exposure to Asian cuisine using this, correct?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's the amount that maybe some of these restaurants use. I think I honestly think there's no hey, we're just going to enhance this General Biggs chicken like this, right? And so I think I sometimes, that's why folks go into a Chinese restaurant and say, hey, could you back off the MSG? Although I love your flavors, I want it. You can definitely tell when you have your favorite Chinese restaurant, you can tell by the first bite if they have it or not. But you still want to eat more and more and more. And that is the sensory thing Diana was talking about, where your brain has been taken over, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And now I see a lot of our steakhouse partners, now they're coming out and saying, hey, chef, what do you think about MSG? I think they're getting back on board with the MSG train. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's just how you use it and the amount used.
Yeah. I mean, you look at barbecue competitions now. I feel like that is a kind of a staple ingredient that is put in there. And there are definitely times where you've had something like a brisket and wow, they used a little bit too much of that. I want the beef to speak for a little bit, not just the MSG, but it's definitely coming back. And I think people know. I mean, umami is delicious. That's kind of the goal behind it. So that's why people want to use it. But again, it needs to be used in the right amount for sure.
Yeah, you can definitely use too much. One of my favorite, actually we'll say my two favorite applications of it are our pals up at Good Company in Cleveland on their Good Boy burger. The special sauce has has a little bit in it, and it's you can just feel it on the back of your throat.
You can feel it. It
so
coats
good.
your mouth.
Yeah, it's that all over goodness. I also love doing anytime I do. Lord forgive me, I'm mentioning Yardbird on our podcast here. Anytime I do a Nashville hot fried chicken, in the crust of it, I put a little bit of it. It's so good.
Well, I mean, you need to add some flavor to chicken, right?
Right. Chicken needs all the help it can get, right? A couple other things that I wanted to discuss. We've already touched a little bit on the idea of putting salt in your dry aging cooler and the fact that it doesn't pull away. How do you guys feel about cooking, right? There's this idea, and maybe this is less of a chef-centric topic, more of a home-cooked topic, but what is the difference between salting before or salting after? What's going to get you the best results?
That's a great question. You know why?
It's a good question.
I think different cultures. I was in Russia last year, and I was doing a meat ideation for some chefs, and I went to season our product, our strips and tomahawks, before. So it was in raw state. Put my oil on both sides, a little bit of oil. You know how I love about that. And then I seasoned them. And they all went, whoa! And they called me out no, you season after the steak is cooked.
That is crazy.
And I said, why? Why do you do that? Oh, that's just the way it is. And, people are set in their own ways, right? You know that. And I proceeded to do is I said, okay, let's do it this way. And I brought kosher salt from America. Don't tell anybody I smuggle this over the Russian border. And I bought my own pepper. And because every country I've learned that salt and pepper is totally different.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to get something that is totally like, what is this, right? So I proceeded to do it, season the steak naturally, raw. And then I cooked one, and I put the seasoning on after. I held up the one with the seasoning after, and the seasoning fell off.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I proved to them, look at this. This is a cooked steak. The seasoning's still attached, and this one fell off. Which one are we going to like? Oh! So that was kind of an eye-opening. So to your question, I think more Americans are taught instinctively to season before you actually put it on the grill or cook something.
Yeah, for sure.
That is, I'm feeling so patriotic right now. Like, sorry, Russia. But let's talk about that then. You season beforehand, and of course you can finish with, I love when it's finished with those Maldon salts because they're so thin, it almost looks like they melt.
It's like a snowflake.
Yeah, they do kind of melt.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So what is happening to the meat with the salt? Is the salt kind of getting inside that meat? What is the whole point of doing it beforehand? We've already, and most people probably experience it tastes better. What is happening though?
To me, it's actually it's kind of sticking to the meat, but it's actually pulling some moisture to that surface. So especially if you're going to grill or do something on the cast iron, when you create that Maillard reaction or the browning on the steak, you need water. It's heat, water, protein, and a little bit of sugar. So you need that moisture in there to really create that effect. So then you're going from that state right onto that really hot grill, and you're going to get a great crust on there. So that, to me, is the importance of doing it ahead of time, because otherwise afterwards, I mean, you're still gonna get some char on there for sure, but it's just not going to be the same amount, because once you're out of moisture, you're done. So it's causing more of that moisture to come out for sure.
I remember we did a conference, so here's another little story about that.
Gosh.
So this is really good to bring up because what Diana just said is spot on, but the other side of that coin is we were doing this big function, 700 folks.
I have an idea.
And we did a filet mignon. That's what we're going to do. And I just happened to, when you work with other companies and hotels, they have their own way. And I was explaining to somebody, we're going to season our steaks tomorrow, not today. Well, I'm not sure where that message got lost. And he seasoned the steaks a day before with lots of kosher salt. And I swear, all my guests told me, "Are you sure this is not corned beef?" So that salt, as you remember, right, was just it just permeated into the beef, and it was such a bad experience. I mean, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't bad. It wasn't a filet mignon like you would normally take. So it was kind of like a salt brine.
Yes.
And it was kind of like making corned beef. So on the side of, on the other side of that, be careful.
Yeah, for sure. On your steak items, you definitely don't want to salt ahead of time. But on your roasts and such, you can add some salt in to help. You're going to cook, like if you think about your chuck roll, if we're going to smoke that and shred it, you're going to cook it so far to shred it that the moisture content isn't as big of a deal, but you want some of that salt to get into the middle of it so you got more flavor throughout. So that's the whole point of doing it ahead of time. But your steaks, you could dry those out pretty good if you let them sit way too long.
Or if you just have lots of extra money later on and you decide, I'm going to make pastrami out of
tenderloin.
Tenderloin.
Let's just do it.
Oh my gosh! I'm sure it was still good.
It was good, but it was kind of a jolting experience. Wow, this is salty.
I remember a couple years ago I was talking to some chef friends. Actually, we were down in the Texas Panhandle, and they said, one of the biggest things that I think most people don't know when they eat in restaurants is, or one of the biggest things that people who are trying to replicate that experience at home versus in restaurants is the amount of seasoning.
Oh, yes.
I mean, by and large, people under-season because there's an idea of like, well, I can't consume that much salt. But really, how much of it's actually staying on the meat?
Yeah, and it's not to me, the amount you sprinkle on, it's not going to cause that much of a difference, in all honesty. But you have to think of the whole surface area. So if you're cooking a tenderloin, yeah, that surface area that's touching the grill is small, but think of how thick that steak is. So you have to have enough seasoning to get all the way through. And I've been amazed by how much people have undersalted their meat. And I've learned that from here. I did not learn that anywhere else, but from watching the chefs, for sure.
You're spot on with that. Yeah. I think where chefs go wrong, and they don't realize this until somebody points it out to them, is if you're doing a 4-course meal, how much salt are you using in that 4-course meal?
Oh, that's a really good point.
Now, you've used it in the appetizer. You've used it in the salad. You've used it in the bread, depending on butter what you use. Mm-hmm. And now you've got an entree, which could be a protein, a vegetable, and a starch. You've seasoned all that. Yeah. And now you go to a dessert, which desserts have a little bit of salt in them, and that's what enhances the flavor of a nice dessert. Yeah. But now you take that 4-course meal, and you add up the salt content of that, and you're going to be very shocked and surprised what you have.
Yeah. I never thought about that, and it just builds on itself too.
Right.
That's a really good point.
I just want an entire meal like salt baked, if you could, Tony.
Salt baked.
Yeah, everything inside that crust. I want to crack it. I want to be like, look, there's the peas. There's the.
The carrots?
Is that pudding?
A pot pie? A salt-crusted pot pie?
We might be onto something. I'll tell you what, on that note, I believe we're going to put a wrap on this one. If this is your first time listening to the Meat Speak podcast, what have you been doing, dude? We're over the hump of even halfway of season 2. So there's a season and a half worth of meat science content out there just waiting to be devoured. But do know you can find it across all of your major podcasting platforms, Google Play, Apple, Spotify, or by visiting certifiedangusbeef.com/podcast. Sound just feels so good rolling off the tongue, doesn't it? Until next time, I'm Brian Schaff, Chef Tony Biggs, meat scientist Diana Clark. We appreciate all of you for listening to the Meat Speak podcast, powered by the Certified Angus Beef brand.